Thank you. So I'm quite keen on evidence-based policy, and the implementation of voter ID was suggested to be introduced to tackle electoral fraud and particular personation. From the figures that we've seen in various reports, it was suggested that between in 2019, after which the previous government brought in the voter ID rules, there were 34 allegations of personation, which is 0.0000057% of the 58 million votes cast in that election, and then 2 people cautioned or convicted out of 58 million votes, which was 0.00035% of votes. We then saw turnout drop, and from the report as well, suggestion of up to, I think it was 3.1 million. Hold on a second, I'm trying to find. 1.9 million people who said that they, from surveys, didn't vote because of voter ID. Do you think that the voter ID, the impact of voter ID, was a proportionate response to the problem it was trying to solve?
It was intending, I think, to solve a number of issues, and obviously we've had voter ID in Northern Ireland now for about 20 years. I think it's had some effect, and we published a bespoke paper on this in early September, looking at the general election and trying to learn some of the lessons from it. It has, I mean, just to set up what I think we found, a small group of people didn't bring voter ID to the polling station. Most of those went away, got ID, came back and were able to vote, but some didn't vote. So 0.08% didn't vote. About 16,000 people, therefore, at this general election didn't vote or were unable to vote, and they should have been able to. So it's had some effect. And so
they arrived at a polling station and then didn't return. So that was 0.8, you said?
0.08%, 16,000 people.
Is that literally turned up at the front, turned up and spoke to the polling clerk? Because obviously there may have been people that got discouraged before that you're not counting in those numbers.
Absolutely. That's people who actually spoke to them, and they were then turned away and came back. We'll come back to people who were discouraged in just a second. The system which on voter ID was surprisingly underused was the voter authority certificate. We had, I think, 210,000 people applied for a VAC between January 23 and the deadline for the general election. 26,000 VACs were used, 26,000 out of a 40-odd million voters. So it seemed remarkably low. And that was obviously part of the solution, was trying to give people who didn't have other forms of voter ID. That has informed, therefore, and the evidence has therefore informed our recommendations that we should expand the list of acceptable IDs. And we've made those recommendations publicly and to government, particularly, obviously the veterans card is being debated at the moment, but there are a number of others which could be added as well. To target some of the groups who find it harder to engage. So there are various travel discount cards, for example, that would work. And crucially, a digital ID as well, because at the moment producing a piece of paper that someone has to bring, if you could have a digital ID, and we've found some with the right security standards, that would help people tremendously be able to just show their phone at a polling station. Finally, for those who don't have it, we recommend that government, in this case this would be something that would have to come through Parliament, look at vouching or attestation. So if someone knows you very well and they are a registered elector and they say, yes, I know this person and I attest formally that they are this person, which many councils can also do, they ought to be able to vote. All of that is with a view to broadening the accessibility for this. Now, some people are put off by it, and our data we saw, and this was from public opinion research, asking people did they vote or not. This is not just people who did vote. Of those who said they didn't vote, about 4% gave voter ID as one of the reasons. And it's not a complete, it's not an absolute link. They had many reasons for not voting. Voter ID clearly played a factor. 4% of those who didn't vote had that as a factor. So it has put some people off. What we managed to do before the election was run some quite significant communications campaigns and get knowledge of the voter ID requirement right up. Because to be honest, we were concerned before the election that there would be a real differential between different regions. England having done it, Scotland having not done it. You can imagine some of the political reaction had there been a real difference in the number of voters turned away. That didn't happen. We were broadly at the high 80s to 90% awareness across the whole of the UK, and it was pretty uniform. So that was good. We're going to have to continue this, but what we now see is, having made the change and Parliament having legislated for this change, people are getting used to it. As I say, most did bring some form of voter ID. It might, but our data is not that great, but it might have had some increase in trust in the election that you had to show an ID, and so concerns about personation do exist. You're absolutely right, the numbers are incredibly low, but the concerns about this, any forms of mistrust might have been helped by it. But hopefully this will then become very much like Northern Ireland, where it's taken for granted that you'll bring a form of voter ID for an election.
Just to recap back to the beginning, though, was voter ID and personation a problem that the Electoral Commission saw prior to 2019 when it was put into the manifesto of a political party?
We were very unusual in not having any check on the person turning up to vote, and this was something regularly reported by international observers. And the Electoral Commission for about 20 years is saying, look, we need to do something about this. But our position has been, yes, we do need to do something about it, because it will increase confidence in the electoral process. But one person turned away is too many. People should be able to exercise their vote. And that's why we're now in this position of recommending changes that will deal with those people who were either turned away or put off. I mean, as you've indicated, the numbers who were actually turned away at the polling stations is the tip of an iceberg of people who felt that voter ID was a deterrent to them. So we must increase our public awareness, but we must also look at how we can make changes to the voter authority certificate, to the list of forms of ID that would be acceptable, particularly for those that were put off. So the job seekers allowance card, which would be another thing that would directly go to groups of unemployed people who we know were put off more than others. And the over 18s Oyster card will be another one where we know young people, there were lots of concerns.
I don't want to drill too much into the detail of what could or could not be.
Okay.
Yeah, just very briefly, you talked about broader international systems and comparisons with the voter ID systems, and there being many countries where voter ID is a thing and it's accepted. Was a comparison made with those countries where a nationally available, whether it's compulsory or optional general ID card is available? Because you look at New Zealand, which does not. It is in all of our examples of good electoral systems. They do not have a national ID card. They do not have voter ID. We are a very different country culturally to a lot of countries where, particularly in Europe, you have ID cards. Was that taken into account when we looked at other countries and said, oh, well, we'll get used to it?
Well, yes, but it's undoubtedly a lot easier where you have got a national ID card that everybody is required to hold.
That seems self-evident. It does not seem to have been taken into that much account when actually implementing this incredibly dramatic policy.
I think there was a significant amount of work done primarily within government to look at who holds which sorts of ID. And we are thinking now there's about 3% of people who don't hold one of the IDs that's currently on that list. But certainly that work was done. The government led the work, but with us and others to really make an assessment of where the gaps are. And that's what created the idea of the voter authority certificate, because there were substantial numbers of people who did not have one of the accepted forms of ID, so something needed to be done to enable them to get something specifically for this purpose. So the intention there, I think, was right. The implementation hasn't been very good. As Vijay described, the voter authority certificate was only used in 26,000, which is a tiny number of cases, given the number of people we think do not hold one of those forms of ID. So let's reform that, and let's increase the list of accepted ID, and that will narrow the gap. But from your comments and Mr. Curtis's comments, I mean, you are looking, as we are, for a very substantial improvement, because one person turned away is one too many, and I think we would all hold to that.
I finished my question just by asking whether the fundamental principle of voter ID is being evaluated. If it is a system that cannot work without other changes, a national ID card, which obviously is not on the agenda, is the principle of it being evaluated, as well as how to make a bad system work, in my opinion.
Well, the approach that we have taken is in the report, which we think the right approach now, having implemented it, is to make it work better.